Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Intruder Theatre in the Making podcast. I'm your host, Remi Rachuba, and thank you so much for tuning in. Now, a little bit of a different piece of music at the very beginning of the podcast. I just thought, well, I'm just going to spruce things up a little bit and give you a different fragment from the soundtrack for my play, just to give you something different, not the same piece every time. And maybe next time we have another episode, I can play something completely different. Now, it's episode 5 already. I can't believe. Lockdown part 2. It never ends. And I just thought, well, maybe I can tell you what's happening with the piece for the time being, because quite a lot of people ask me about Intruder. Even today, I had a call with a friend and she was asking me, Remi, what's happening with Intruder? So for the time being, nothing is happening. Everything is put on hold. We hope to go live and hope to the theatres in 2021, but nobody knows when it's going to be. Maybe in the summer, maybe in the late spring. For the time being, I'm focusing on another application for funding for the play that I have been writing over the pandemic about the work at the Children's Home for Autistic Children. So maybe that's the project, that development is going to go first before we move on with Intruder. But nobody knows what's going to happen, and Intruder is for the time being put on hold. So that's the latest update. Now, coming back to Intruder, and what I was talking about in episode 4 was funds and foundations. So we need to go back in time. That's April 2012, and you may remember I was talking about sending all these emails and letters to different funding organizations and theaters and inquiring about development and getting money for the initial development of their piece. Now, of course, all the replies, all the emails were no, no, no. So there was really nothing that I was looking forward to, apart from a meeting with the literary manager of the National Theatre of Scotland, who at that particular time was George Asa Salinger. Now, I had been emailing George for quite some time at that time, and it was just a matter of time when we would meet. And we met in April. I dug up my emails and found an email from the 11th of April 2012, and I sent it to Catherine and David, who I was working, who were attached to the project. And this is what I said after meeting George. I've just met with George from the NTS. We had a general chat, get together, so it was nice to meet him. He suggested we participate in the Scratch Night by NTS this May. However, I'm off to Iceland in 2 weeks till May 15th, so that's out of question. However, maybe that's an idea we could consider for the future, either at the Arches or NTS. He seemed to have enjoyed the piece and was very much keen to be informed of what's happening with the piece. So that's the meeting, and that's the impression I had. But we stayed in touch. I stayed in touch with George after our meeting, and George was very, very helpful. And I will talk about him in some other episodes. But coming back to Catherine and David, and to that email and talking about Scratch Night, we did have an idea to actually put the piece on its feet and to try it with an audience. That's why we were talking about doing some kind of a little performance, a little bit of a presentation, and National Theatre of Scotland was doing something like that at that particular time. and we wanted to be involved in it. But because I was going to Iceland on a holiday for 2 weeks, I couldn't attend it. But I think anyone who is working on any project or any piece, I would always encourage anyone to participate in any activities and doing something, sharing the work with other people, because it's really very useful. And I know that from experience, to get feedback from people, to know, okay, this is the piece that needs to be developed more, or that's underdeveloped, or that's the piece that people love, and I think it's wonderful to get that interaction with the audience, and this is what we were trying to do. Well, it didn't work out with the National Theatre of Scotland, but we were thinking, okay, if that doesn't work, maybe we can take part in another Scratch Night by NTS. Also, it was around the same time I got my feedback from the Playwright Studio. You might remember I was talking about meeting Fiona Sturgeon-Shy from the Playwright Studio, the creative director at the Mitchell's Library in Glasgow, and after that meeting I sent her my piece. And the Playwright Studio is this wonderful organization in Glasgow who helps playwrights, emerging playwrights, with different aspects of playwriting, and they also run the National Script Reading Service. So whoever has any piece of writing and you want to have some feedback on it, you can send it to them, and one of their readers will read it and send you their feedback on it. And after I met Fiona, I did it, and then she sent me the feedback, which was very good at that time for what it was and what the piece was. And it was also interesting to know how other people see it. Because I had already got feedback from Caroline from the Royal Court. Here we had another feedback from the Playwright Studio. So all these kind of forms and opinions were very, very useful for any future work that we were to do. And of course, we were planning to do development on the piece, so that always came in handy. So I'm kind of thinking, great, I met George, now I'll be going on holiday to Iceland, but something happened that I really didn't expect. And what it was that David, who had been attached to the project as a director, emailed me and said that he wouldn't be available to help me with the project anymore, because he was going to travel with the project, but also because he was going to be working in London, and it would have been impossible for him to travel to Glasgow to work on the piece, which I completely understood, and that was it, really. I was there again, starting from scratch, because I only had Catherine attached to the project, and I was thinking, okay, what am I going to do now? I need to look for someone else. Also, none of the emails from the funds and foundations bore fruit, so it was kind of like being at square one, to be quite honest. But I really didn't think about it too long, because in June I was going to Amsterdam to work on Before I Sleep by Dream Think Speak at the Holland Festival. You may remember I was talking about Dream Think Speak in my previous episodes, and that particular play, it was so successful that the Holland Festival invited this site-specific production to be performed over there in Amsterdam. So I was very, very excited about it, because I loved being part of that project, and it was incredible. So I went to Amsterdam, I had a great time, and I think it was also the time for me to think about certain things, to reflect, to think, what can I do next with the piece, who to approach. And I think it's always good to have these projects, because they they kind of take you out of that bubble, and then you can look at something from a different point of view. And that was definitely the case with Before I Sleep. I stopped thinking about my solo piece and I focused my energy on something new. Well, I knew it, but it was a new environment, new cast, a new venue, and quite an exciting place to be. I loved Amsterdam. It was incredible. So that was in June, and then when I came back in July, I was thinking, okay, I'm starting from scratch. Where do I start? I knew that I would be going for Arts Trust Scotland fund again, because they told me to reapply, but I needed to find a director. And the very first thing I did was I contacted my very good friend from drama school. Her name was Amanda Gaughan, and so I immediately went to the people that I knew, and Amanda studied with me. She studied directing, and we never worked together during our year, which is quite bizarre, but we always stayed in touch. Whatever she was doing, she always told me. I went to see it, and I loved her work. I think she was extremely talented, and I was really, really excited to see what she was going to come up with. I was always telling her that she would be the next artistic director of the National Theatre of Scotland. But it would never happen because she passed away a couple of years ago, but I would talk about it in some other episode. So I'm going back to Amanda, asking her, would you like to work on it? Amanda said, just, can I read it? She read it, she liked it, and then I already had a director attached. So I already had my team, Amanda as the director, Catherine as a dramaturg, and I was quite happy to proceed with my resubmission for Arts Trust Scotland. Now, I didn't need to do the whole application. I just needed to replace certain bits and bobs and put info about Amanda instead of David. And I submitted my application, I think, by mid-August 2012. And because I lived in Glasgow, I always went to the Fringe, either to see the plays, but also when I went to the Fringe that year, I was looking for different workshops where I could find out about development of plays or funding, stuff like that. And the Playwright Studio does loads of workshops, so I checked that out, and I also went to other workshops and panel discussions ran by other organizations. And one of the workshops I went to was by the National Theatre Studio. I think it was at the National Theatre, a studio for new work, and we are talking about 2012. I am not really sure whether they exist anymore or they have a different name. So I went to it because I remember I saw on the website that they wanted to help emerging playwrights with their plays. But I was slightly disappointed when I left because it turned out that they were helping mid-scale theatre companies or people that they were interested in with the project. So for me, as a solo performer and just a theatre maker, was not for me. So although they were very nice and very generous that they did that talk, I remember I left kind of disappointed, thinking, well, they wouldn't be able to help me. So really, once again, a period of trying certain things out and doing and going, but really nothing helped, like nothing. And I was just really, really hoping that this Arts Trust Scotland application was going to be successful, because that was the really last resort. And a very interesting thing happened in August 2012 when I was going to Edinburgh. I was working at the Riverside Museum, and I went to Edinburgh whenever I had a day off to see a play or take part in a workshop. and I bumped into Ed Littlewood in the street. And you may remember Ed was one of the producers on The Builders, where I worked at the Travers Theatre, and Ed is the co-producer of Intruder. But in 2012, I just knew him from The Builders. And I was briefly telling him about my piece and what it's about, that it's about assaults and muggings and stuff like that. And he then told me about the restorative justice system. And as soon as I heard it, I said, "What?" I just really couldn't believe it. I knew immediately that this was something that was going to be in my play, and it is. I'm not going to talk about where it is in the play, but as soon as Ed told me about this system, I couldn't believe it, because this was something that I wanted to have in the piece, but I didn't even know how to articulate, or I didn't know that anything like that even existed. So you never know, and I always think, and I think with time we would be able to see that even going to different events, concerts, I met people, or I bumped into people that became very, very important in my journey. That's actually that's very interesting. Whether it's coincidental, although I don't believe in coincidences, that's interesting that every time I went somewhere, well, maybe not every time, but very often whenever I went somewhere, was like I was to go to that particular event and experience it and get something out of that. So I knew after meeting Ed, incredible, great. I was very, very happy that I bumped into him, and he gave me an idea for my play, well, a story, sub-story in my play. And then thinking about, okay, what can I do next? I came back to the playwright studio, and I knew they were running, and they still do run the mentoring program, where they, I think, select 5 mentorees, and they attach them to a mentor, a professional playwright who mentors them in writing a new play. So I thought, well, I'm Scotland-based, and why don't I go for it? So I submitted my application, and the decision came after a couple of weeks, and it wasn't the decision I wanted, but there was something in it that really surprised me. And when Fiona emailed me back, she said, "We really had quite a debate about your piece. Unfortunately, it didn't go your way. However, one of our mentors, and it is Peter Arnott, would like to email you and meet with you to talk about your piece." And I was quite surprised that, although it was a negative decision, there was some positive in it. And before I even knew it, I already got an email from Peter. That's on the 5th of October 2012. This is what I got. "Hi Remi, Fiona has written to you, I think, about the mentoring scheme. I'm sorry you weren't picked, but I'd like to meet up sometime. I was very interested in what I think you were trying to do. Might we have a cup of coffee sometime?" And of course, I was extremely happy, because Peter Arnott is one of the leading Scottish playwrights, and I've heard about his plays. He was actually one of the playwrights who worked on my acting and directing course, MACCT, but a year after me. So I was really quite chuffed that he was willing to meet with me, especially as I didn't know what was going to happen in the future. But with time, Peter also would be very helpful, and I would talk about him a little bit in some other episodes, where I would be focusing on staying motivated and having people to come back to in case you have any questions. And Peter has been helpful since that time, since we got in touch, and that's 2012. Always very generous. Even last week I was trying to email him something, ask for help, and he emails you right away. It's quite astonishing how helpful people can be. And I think around that time, that decision from Arts Trust Scotland came. And I remember I was coming back from the Riverside Museum where I was working. I had a night shift, like an evening shift, and I opened my email and there it was, a positive decision about my application, that we would be awarded money. I was over the moon. I was so excited. Goodness me, how happy I was that all these efforts and the work that I put in all these applications finally worked and bore fruit, and then I could pay the people, and then I would be able to spend time on my play. And I emailed Catherine and Amanda right away, and I told them about it, and we were all very, very happy. And I thought, okay, now we can start planning the development, and that would happen in December. One of the things that I was slightly concerned was that the amount of money. I remember I applied for £1,500, but I only got £1,000. And I was slightly concerned whether I would be able to pay people because I was applying for a 5-day development. But then, having spoken to Amanda and Catherine, they said, no, 5 days, that's actually quite a lot. 3 days would be enough. And actually it was. Amanda told me, you know what, you don't need 5 days. You can have 3 days split into half days. So you can have 1 full day, and then half a day, and then 1 full day. Because actually, as a writer-performer, you also need to go back home. You need to think about it. You need to redraft it or have a think what we speak about during the development. And that was true. And for anyone who is applying for funding for a development period on a play, you know, if you don't get the amount that you want, that's not the end of the world. You can do something with it, or, you know, you can maybe work fewer days, and everything is possible. Just like it was in my case, that instead of 5 days I had 3 days, but then when you split it into 3 and then half days, it all makes sense. And it did. We worked on it in December 2012, just before Christmas. And working on the play was a really wonderful thing. I didn't know that it would be so much fun. Me, Catherine, and Amanda, had a great time. They helped me immensely. I threw everything at them, all my accounts, all the events, and, they miraculously drew conclusions from it. They put it all together. They told me, okay, these are the bits that we can focus on. These are the bits that we can get rid of. And I wasn't particularly very protective of my work. I just believed and trusted that whatever they were saying was right, because I didn't really have a lot of experiences. Well, I didn't have a lot of experience, in new writing or proper development, apart from the work that I did on my MACCT course. So we played with loads of ideas. We talked about stuff. I had separate sessions with Catherine as a dramaturg. I had separate sessions with Amanda. We also employed a Scottish actor. His name is Mark Wood, who I still keep in touch with, a lovely guy, because Amanda didn't know whether maybe it was a play for 2 people, not 1. So that was also an idea that we were playing with, and I think that's the development that's what you do in development. You play with certain ideas, you play with different aspects, and we talked about something, or we got rid of certain things, and then I went back home and I redrafted the piece. Although, as I was saying, we had done some work on it before with David, we didn't want to forget about it. So still the piece had a very non-linear structure because I always loved it, and Catherine and Amanda always liked that idea. So we were trying to build up on what we already had. We never wanted to just get rid of what we had, but try to chip in, add, maybe elaborate, or there were pieces or fragments of the piece that were underdeveloped, or we were talking about, okay, this is a very strong image, I think we should keep it, but here maybe we need more detail. And that was very, very helpful for me as the writer to actually go, okay, so next time when I redraft, I can pay attention to all these details. I think that if we hadn't got that amount of money from Creative Scotland, I don't think I would have been able to just progress with the piece. And also, interestingly enough, that's also the time when the piece changed its title. So it wasn't Unlucky Pehova anymore, it was The Visitor. That's what Catherine Grosvenor suggested, which I loved, and we kept that title after that development. But also that development had a very symbolic meaning to me. Prior to the development, I found out that Dream Think Speak was working on another production, and that was, in the beginning, was The End at Somerset House, and Tristan Sharps very kindly asked me to work on it, and I said yes, and he said, wonderful, but one of the conditions is that we only take people from London. So if you want to take part in it, you need to be London based. And well, I couldn't say no, and I said yes. So I knew that I would be moving to London in January. So we did the development, which was the very last creative thing I did in Scotland. So it was a wonderful ending to my Scottish life, as I always called it. I moved to Scotland in 2005, and that was the end of 2012, so 7 years of living in Scotland, which I always look upon very fondly, and I'm always grateful to Scotland for whatever happened over there. I went to Poland for Christmas, and then that was me leaving Scotland on the 3rd of January 2013. But what happened after that and how I redrafted Intruder, I will be talking about it in the next episode. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll hopefully speak to you next time. Bye for now.